And can the magician make sick men well? And can the physician a fortune divine? Without lily, germander, and sops of wine, with sweet briar and bonfire and strawberry wire and columbine, and in and out and around as a ball, with hither and thither and straight as a line, without lily, germander, and sops of wine, with sweet briar and bonfire and strawberry wire and columbine. When Saturn did live, there lived no poor. The king and the beggar on roots did dine, with lily, germander, and sops of pine, with sweet briar and bonfire and strawberry wire and columbine, with sweet briar and bonfire and strawberry wire and columbine.
And I just want to welcome you to our first edition of The Word this autumn in Sligo Central Library. And this is in association with the ATU Sligo BA in Creative Writing and Literature. So tonight we have a very special guest. We have Cecily Gilligan, who will be in conversation with Niamh Mac Cabe about her book, Cures of Ireland. We also have our open mic, which will be moderated by Catherine Whitehead. And we have our audience Q&A, which you're all welcome to take part in. I'm just going to officially now hand you over to Niamh Mac Cabe, and she will officially introduce you to Cecily. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Michelle. So, folks, this is Cecily Gilligan.
Hello.
Author, sailor, world traveller, environmentalist, teacher. But full disclosure, I know Cecily for about 300 years. We've been friends since we were kids. So we have a lot of history together, and I'm really excited and honoured to be interviewing her here. So she has published this wonderful book, Cures of Ireland, and we're approaching a very significant date. In about 2 or 3 days' time, it will be 1 year published. And the book has done tremendously for Cecily. I think we're coming up on 15,000 books sold. Isn't that right, Cecily?
Yes.
And it has received and continues to receive rave reviews. And also, I believe that it has acquired a publisher in the US, Cecily. Is this right?
It's true.
Quite a prestigious publisher. And that will be coming out in the US in the spring of 25. So you're very welcome, Cecily.
Thank you, Niamh.
And my first question to you is, where did the seed of this book begin, and how did that begin?
Well, it came from the land, I suppose. I grew up on a farm in Sligo, County Sligo, and I was very close to my grandmother, a lovely woman, Helena, who lived to be 100. But the folklore was very much alive, and it was part of our lives on the farm and in our community. The fairies and the banshees and all these fabulous stories. And a part of that was the folk traditions, the folk medicine. So the cures were very much part of our community. And as a child, for example, everybody got cures. We just took it for granted. So I was cured of ringworm by the local seventh son. And my dad came home from the pub one night with a herbal bottle for me to drink when I had jaundice. And lots of other things like that. So it was very much there and part of our lives. And then it was when I was in university in Cork and I was studying social science, and I had to come up with an idea for a final year dissertation, and I settled upon the traditional cures because I thought there was something quite fascinating about it, which there is, I still believe there is, and something quite unique maybe about their survival in this country, in Ireland. So I did research at that time, talked to people that had the cures. And then it kind of basically it was a good piece of research, and my supervisor at the time said, you know, there might be a book there, Cecily. But I left it dormant in my head for about 20 years. And then I said, I better get back to that book. And so early 2000s, I came back to it, started interviewing lots of people and doing lots of research, and finding that the cures were still alive and quite strong in places. So that was kind of the history of it.
So we're talking about something that started in your head like 40 years ago. So it's been a slow burn. And then in the early 2000s, you actually started acting on your plan. And that involved, am I right, that involved talking to nearly 100 people who had the cure. So that involved a lot of research, I'm sure, to find these people. Then am I right in saying you travelled to these people's homes, sat with them, talked to them? What was that like, that process?
Well, that was really, it was a fabulous process. I really enjoyed it. I had I'm not quite sure what it was, but I had some compulsion to keep going and to complete it, because it was very much my own project. I didn't have any funding or any support from anybody, but I thought this was something that was important to document. And I conducted, qualitative surveys, as in I talked to people. I had talked to maybe 20, 30 people originally in the 80s, and then I went back looking for those people or their successors, and I ended up talking to over 90 people who have a wide variety of cures, trying to get a good selection of the cures, some faith, some herbal. And it was a really fascinating process, because you're going into people's houses. Pre-COVID, I have to say, I did it. People were very welcoming and, willing to talk about it. And I always respected people's privacy. As you'll see from my book, I haven't revealed people's identity. And I would see them part of a bigger picture, a healing tradition that goes back probably hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it was a great adventure, Niamh. And because I live Sligo, Leitrim area, a lot of my research was conducted in the northwest. But I did branch out, and I went to other places in other parts of the country to find cures that I couldn't trace here, or maybe that I wanted to explore a little more. I also visited the holy wells, which are important for healing, holy stones and clays, and I went on a few pilgrimages. Mm-hmm. So I kept busy, and it was hard to get it over the line. Anybody knows what a project you take on, but I kept at it, and I got over the line. And actually, Niamh Mac Cabe beside me gave me quite a lot of support, a number of pep talks, saying, keep going, you can do it. And I did it, so thank you.
And that type of process, that long, arduous process, involved total immersion for you. But also, and I think this is where one of your skills, it involved getting the people you were talking to trust you entirely with their story. Because, talking about cures, especially in contemporary Ireland, it can be kind of not taken too seriously. So you were able to sit with these people and get them to trust you, get them to tell their story to you without fear of being ridiculed. Did you have a method to do that, or is it just your shining personality?
No, I didn't have a method. I suppose I just took people in good faith, and I whatever they were willing to tell me, I just accepted it, and I believed it, and gave them the benefit of the doubt. I basically had a series of questions, because I knew the things that were kind of important and that were coming up in the subject matter. So I asked people similar questions, and I got, variations on the answers that helped me to kind of hone it down. But no, I suppose it's like anything. People are all sorts of personalities. Some people are very outgoing, some people are shy. But if you, if you're respectful and treat people well, they generally respond in a positive way to that. And it was about 5 years chatting to the people, but I was also teaching, because I couldn't give up the day job, not exactly anyway. Kept teaching even on a part-time basis, so I'm a primary teacher, which I really like and I really enjoy.
I imagine that your own experience, which you told us all about at the start, your own experience with cures as a child and growing up in rural South Sligo, and cures and folklore being really part of life there, but you yourself being cured of, was it jaundice, and was there something else you were cured of?
The ringworm.
And ringworm. I imagine that bringing that to your interviews with people was something, so that you were saying, well, I've been there, I believe in it, I also have had, the cure happen to me, so that might have gained their trust, would you say?
Yeah. Well, also, I think because a lot of the cures I found were in rural Ireland. You know, the cures have come from the land, and that's where they apparently are still strongest. That's what I found. So, yeah, I suppose it's just I had a kind of a sympathetic or an understanding of it and non-judgmental, and took it from there, Niamh.
I think that's sympathetic and empathetic view of yours, I think, was really strong.
And sorry, one thing too, a lot of people said to me, some people said, most people had secrets. And sometimes people said, I don't like to talk about my cure. But then other people said, it's lovely to talk to somebody about the cure. And nobody ever asked me before, and nobody was very interested. Or I always kind of, if there was something like maybe the number 3 was important in their cure, I would say to them, well, why is number 3 important? And they'd often say, well, it's just the way I was told to make it, and I always make it that way, and I don't question it. So a whole variety of personalities and analysis, I suppose, of their cures.
So this is a big question, and maybe I should leave it to the end, but now that I've started, I'm going to keep going. So clearly, you wrote an entire book about it. These cures work. These people cure different ailments. So what are your personal views regarding why do they work?
Okay, well, what I ultimately conclude is that I think the cures, I don't say they work every single time for everybody, but I think they work for many people. So, and I also think that they wouldn't continue to exist for hundreds, if not thousands of years if they didn't work. So the word would go out, the cure doesn't work, and it would peter out, it would no longer exist. And that's what people would have said to me also. And why they continue to exist is probably quite a complex reason, and I don't know all the answers. But I think the fact that they're traditional, that they are deeply rooted in our culture and our tradition is probably very important. They come from a time when people had very little, when Ireland was a very poor country, and people had to heal themselves using the land, using the plants, using their neighbours, helping with their animals. So when people there was no doctors, there was no veterinary surgeons. So they come from that tradition, deeply rooted in the tradition. And then I would also say, I think there's, you might have a physical problem, but so for example, you have headaches, but you go to a lady and she has the cure for headaches. But I also think there's quite a strong psychological component to it, in that usually when you go for a cure, people are nice and they're friendly and they'll chat to you, and you say, oh, I've got the headache and it's been causing me problems for 5 years, and you tell them some of your issues, your problems. And there's a nice human interaction, a sort of a sympathetic compassion is shown. People with cures, I found, are overwhelmingly generous in terms of their energy and their time and willingness to help others. So I think there's a kind of a psychological thing which helps people on that road to recovery or healing. And I would also say there's a spiritual dimension to many of the cures, in that a lot of the cures involve prayers. People say you have to have faith in the cure for it to work. It might be spiritual faith, or it might be faith in the actual cure. But they have a spiritual dimension, because like I said, a lot of the cures have prayers and they have ritual involved, and people, I think, get a lot of solace from that. And they might believe that God, or whatever they believe in the spiritual element, is part of that healing as well. So I think the traditional cures incorporate the physical and the psychological and the spiritual. It's not always obvious, but I think that's going on underneath in a lot of instances, or when you look at them in a bigger picture.
Thanks, Cecily. I think it is time to hear you read from your book. Would you do that?
Well, of course, yeah. So I've chosen a few small, short readings, and they're all related to this part of the world, this part of Ireland. And this is the cure for whooping cough. In a seaside town in County Sligo, there was a woman who was an artist, and she had a cure for whooping cough. This is a disease that is highly infectious and potentially life-threatening. Her cure came into existence 44 years previously, when she married a man with the same surname as her own. And they were waiting to queue up for the cure when she arrived home from her honeymoon, she told me. Local people showed her how to make the cure. Initially, she did not believe it, but it always worked. Then I had to believe it. Her husband was also eligible to make this cure, but he never tried it out. She primarily helped young children, 2, 3, 4-year-olds. To make her cure, she had to share food and drink with the child. I gave them biscuits and a drink of orange. I take some of it, the biscuit, and I drink the orange from the same cup. It could be any type of food or drink. I asked them what would they like. It might be an apple. I've often given them chocolate. It was crucial to the success of the cure that they ate and drank the same items. And I finish it if they don't finish it. That is part of the cure. She had learned from experience how to make her cure more effectively. Some of them won't touch it after me having it, and I've learned to drink it in the kitchen privately before giving it to them. If the cure was for an infant, I just give the baby a little milk in a bottle. I have to partake also. I take a sip of it. He or she has got to drink that in my presence, she said. And I pray for them, my own prayers. I usually say it every day before sundown. The toddler had to be brought to her 3 times, only on Mondays and Thursdays, consecutively, and between sunrise and sunset. Following the first visit, the child could be quite sick, but by the second one, they are getting better. And she stressed that they must come for the 3rd time to finish off the cure and the whooping cough. She felt that people needed to have faith in the cure for it to be successful, and that in the past, those cures that did not work, I knew it was because the parents didn't believe it. This cure was popular, but less so in recent years. She thought that most babies are now vaccinated against it. In 2015, there were 117 cases of whooping cough in Ireland. However, in 1953, when the vaccine was first introduced, that figure was almost 5,000. She accepted no money, but was sometimes given gifts, a box of chocolates. Most of them give nothing. A thank you, that's all I wanted. The cure was a positive part of this woman's life. You get such satisfaction and gratitude that you were able to do something like that. It's wonderful, she said.
Thanks, Cecily.
Okay.
That's really interesting, this idea, because a lot of in fact, the majority of the cure havers, if that's the right way to call these people,
I just call them people with cures.
People with cures.
Yeah.
Part of it is you don't accept payment. That you can accept a gift. In fact, in some cases, they don't even accept gifts, but they certainly don't accept payment. That's a really interesting part of the ritual, that it's important that it doesn't become something that they gain from.
Yeah, no. Now, some people do accept money, and a few people would charge a small fee, I found, especially if it was maybe a herbal preparation. But a lot of people don't accept money. Some people are really anti-money. They say, if I take money, the cure will not work. So it's black. It's not black and white. It's grey. But what I would say is that people are very generous, and I didn't come across anybody that does this for financial gain. Some people might say they might have to buy certain ingredients for a cure, so they do it to cover the postage or the costs involved. But what I did find is the exchange tradition is very strong, and that you give somebody in return. But it can be something very simple. So I receive a cure. I've got a heart issue, for example, and someone makes the cure for me. So I give them bottles of wine, just the normal things we give people. In the past, it was bags of potatoes and pounds of sugar and tea, and nowadays people give bottles of wine, mobile phone credit. Plants, flowers. And some people will say to me, that's a very important part of the gift, because the person who's receiving the cure has to think about it, and they have to see, they have to make a decision, right, I'm going to make a chocolate cake and I'm going to bring it to the man tonight. It's my final visit with them. He's been helping my bad back. So it's part of the person being proactive and involved in the process. And also in Niamh, it goes back to a time, like I said, in Ireland and in rural Ireland, people had very little. So a small gift was really welcome. People probably will have heard of a very famous wise woman from Clare in the 1800s, Biddy Early. So Biddy Early, a very famous wise woman, people came to her from all over the country for all sorts of problems that they had. But she wouldn't accept money either. But a whiskey. A bottle of whiskey was a favourite. So, and that's still today. People might get a bottle of wine, or occasionally a bottle of whiskey is still popular.
Another thing, so there's the not accepting money, but then the other thing that seems to repeat throughout the book is the idea of specific things like Mondays and Thursdays is when you come to visit. You need to take the cure between sunrise and sunset. And then the number 3, sometimes there's 3 visits need to happen.
Yeah.
But also the number 3 and the number 7 seem to, a recurring thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that would be all. Ritual is very important, I found, in the cures, and I have a whole chapter on the ritual element of it. But most people have a cure, and they're very specific. Not too far away, one of the little local streets here, there was a man who was a 7th son curing ringworm for many years. And the tradition there was that you had to visit him 3 times. Only on Mondays and Thursdays he could do it. And always, usually between sunrise and sunset. So every cure will have their own little traditions, their rituals, the prayers that are said. You might have to say a prayer, they say a prayer. That came up a lot as a very important part of the tradition of the cure tradition. And then the numbers certain numbers came up a lot. Like 3 threes are 9 came up a lot. 7, like the 7 sons, and also 5. They're all odd numbers, and they're probably Christian and pre-Christian numbers. So I in my book, actually, as well as interviewing the people, I also looked through the literature. I have to say I have a good bibliography if anybody's looking for leads in any direction, because I read about 200 or 300 books. And I tried to extract, so if somebody had ideas about the number 5, in the Irish tradition, extracting that information and putting it into my book. So, and I think also the numbers are very important. Like, for example, going way back in Newgrange, there's the chamber. The light shines through the passageway and into the back of the chamber, and there is a triple spiral carved on the back of the chamber. There's also a triple spiral on the curbstone, I think the giant stone that's at the entrance to Newgrange. So that's 5,000 years ago. So they believe the light would have shone through and would have illuminated the triple spiral. So the number 3 has always been a powerful and important number. I've analysed that to an extent, and then sometimes I just think it's very hard to know. It's sort of from the mists of time where these things came from. But again, I never came across like 4, do things in 4s or do things in 8s or whatever. So some numbers, so it's hard to understand exactly why those numbers are there, but I feel that they're deliberate and important and significant.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, like the subject matter of the cures itself, it's kind of a leap of faith, isn't it? You just have to.
Yes.
You can't question too much. You just have to accept.
Exactly.
I think, Cecily, we should have another reading from you.
Oh,
reading
another
number
reading.
2.
Okay. I have a very high, sophisticated system.
It works?
It does actually work, yes. So going on from the numbers there, I'm going to read. I have a chapter on the 7th daughters and sons. So I'll read a little bit about them. The tradition of the 7th daughter or son having healing powers has been very strong in Ireland. If 7 girls or 7 boys are born consecutively in a family, the 7th child will be able to heal ringworm and sometimes other conditions. It will not work, for example, if there are 7 girls, but a boy is born in between them. Stillborn babies are counted. So even if 7 boys are born and one of them has died at birth, the 7th child will still have the cure. I interviewed 9 people who have this special healing status. All of them cure ringworm, which is the ailment 7th daughters and sons are traditionally linked to. One woman was also able to get rid of warts. Another woman helped a variety of skin problems. And 2 men were full-time faith healers. And these healers dealt with a wide range of illnesses. And there's another little piece, a paragraph I just want to read you about. It's the baby and the worm, because they call it the ringworm, and I just think this is quite fascinating. I spoke to a woman in her early 20s who was a 7th daughter with a cure for ringworm. She worked as a secondary school teacher and had grown up on a small farm in County Sligo. Her parents knew of the tradition of the 7th daughter having this cure, and they tested her with the worm when she was a baby. If you get an earthworm, put it in the child's hand and put the other hand over. That's how you know you have the cure. The worm died in my hand, she explained. When I spoke to her, it was still the case that if she put a worm in her hand, the same thing happened. The minute it goes on my hand, it struggles and it will die within 3 to 4 minutes. Many of the seventh daughters and sons that I interviewed told me a similar story. And that kind of links in there, Niamh, with what you're saying about, you know, it's very hard to kind of explain the traditional cures or, you know, in a scientific manner. That's one very good example. And then there's one other little piece I want to read here about another seventh son who's a local man. I had a thought-provoking conversation with a middle-aged man from a big town in the northwest. This man was well-read and articulate, and he was a seventh son. He rarely made his cure now, but as a child he had cured hundreds of people of ringworm. His family and community had complete faith in his ability to heal. He remembered himself as a 4-year-old, surrounded by people who totally believe what they are about to experience. His father would regularly accompany him when he made the cure. We'd go into the sitting room. You step into a space. It's almost as if I took a breath, and in that space there was no failure, no hesitation. Everyone was quiet, and you just done it. He also said that in his youth, he's found it difficult being different to other children. He described the way in which he cured ringworm. I touch it with my hand in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. He would touch and withdraw his hand 3 times as he said this blessing, touching the ringworm to coincide with the words Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The cure took place over 3 days, but it did not matter which 3 days, so long as they were in a row. Usually, by the second visit, the ringworm had started to dry up and to diminish. Often, he felt a tingling sensation and heat in his hand when he made the cure, or even when he thought or talked about it.
That's really interesting, Cecily, that particular, everything you just read, but particularly that quote of that man who as a child was what did you say again? A holder of cures.
He had the cure, the seventh son, yes.
But he specifically remembers that he would, as a child, he would walk into a space, and I jotted it down because it really struck me. I step into a space, and in that space there is no failure, no hesitation, everyone is quiet, and I just done it. So that really struck me as this communal belief that everyone is behind him. There's no question that this is not going to work. And I think there's something really amazing and strong in that, because he was just a child, you know?
He was a child.
And so that's a real example of faith-based cures. But like you specify in the book that there are 2 types of cures. There's faith-based, and then there's herbal cures. They both work. Can you talk a little bit about that distinction?
So I just tried to simplify it and said basically the faith cures and the herbal cures. Now there are other cures as well, like for example cure the burn. If you lick a man, keep a newt, then you have the cure the burn by licking it. So there are other little things like that. But in general, I found that there were faith cures. About 80% of the cures I interviewed were faith, and about 20% of herbal cures. So, and by faith, I would mean cures that involve prayers. And generally, if you ask the people, I would say, what's the source of your cure? Do you believe? And generally, they would say it's God. Or if they didn't believe in God, they might see, something spiritual. But God was a very common belief. So they would be cures that they would believe, I'm curing you of your problem. Like you've got warts, for example. But I believe the cure is coming from God. So that's a faith cure, and I'm asking you to say some prayers as part of it, or I say some prayers. But also then the herbal cures. So I found only about 20% of the cures I investigated were herbal. And they could be like, for example, I talked to a woman in North Leitrim who has a really well-known, successful cure for shingles, which is quite a difficult problem to to deal with and can drag on. So she goes out into the lanes and gathers about 13 different herbs. It's an old cure passed on within her community, and she had inherited it from her dad. And she makes it into a herbal butter, basically, that you rub onto the shingles. But so what I found was, unfortunately, I think we seem to, as a nation, we seem to have lost our herbal knowledge, or a lot of it. And I believe that, the famine, which was 170 years ago now, 1840s, 1850, that seemed to have a devastating impact on obviously a devastating impact on our country. But also we lost so much of the people. 1 million died and 1 million left. And that was hemorrhaging went on. And with these people, the knowledge went with them. And the language, the Irish language was really devastated by the famine as well, because most of the deaths took place in the poorer parts of Ireland where the language was strongest. So herbal cures do exist, but generally I found people might make just one herbal cure, and they mightn't even, if you ask them, why does the cure work? They say, well, I know the plant, I picked the plant, Granny told me how to make it, I make it as it was. For example, someone made a cure for piles, or it could be for a gout cure, and they didn't question it too much. So, but I think that's something that, people will say to me, there's cures out there for everything, and people had them in the past. Oh, there was a really interesting study, it's worth mentioning, the 1930s. You can access all this information online, ducas.ie. So it's the National Folklore Collection, which is now housed in UCD, and they have a huge wealth of knowledge on all sorts of folklore and the traditional cures as well. And in the 1930s, late 1930s, a really fabulous survey was conducted, or research, with the children of Ireland, school children of Ireland. I think there was about 5,000 schools involved across Ireland, and they got the children to go out and talk to their grandparents and the old people. So these were people that were born in the 1800s, collecting stories about fairies and ghosts and banshees and the castles and Fargirth, or whatever it is, all the old stories, but they also collected a lot of information on the traditional cures for animals and for humans. So that was living tradition that people were writing down. Oh yeah, we the cow is lame and we use comfrey, or whatever it is. So that's all been documented. So we know that 70 years ago, 30, 70, whatever it is, it's almost going on 100 years ago now, 90 years ago, that there was a really strong existence of the folk medicine. And the folk medicine gradually began, basically as Ireland became wealthier. So we joined the European Union, the EU, in the EEC in the 70s, and then the wealth of rural Ireland kind of started to improve, and people could start to afford doctors and vets. And as one person said, we used to go out and pick and mix in the fields, and then we got the tractor and the chemist. So we didn't bother going into the fields anymore. So a lot of that herbal knowledge has been lost. But I do believe it's there to be reclaimed if people want to look for it.
Well, thank God for ducas.ie, right?
Ducas.ie.
Great thing that happened.
Yes.
Cecily, I think it would be lovely to hear another reading.
Another reading, okay. Right, so I want to do a final reading here, and it's about the Holy Wells, because I would have mentioned the Holy Wells. And basically, has everybody visited a Holy Well? I'm sure everybody has. And we have our own local Holy Well, so I want to mention that one as well, the one that's very close to Sligo. So, but the Holy Wells are old, very, very old, and most likely pre-Christian. So I'm just going to read a little intro here about them, and then I'll read a little bit about Tubernault, and I'll finish my reading then. Thank you. Holy Wells. An estimated 3,000 holy wells have survived in Ireland, according to the Atlas of the Irish Rural Landscape. There were probably many more in centuries past. The veneration of these sacred wells has been taking place continuously for at least 2,000 years, and possibly for much longer, maybe since the first people came to live on this island 10,000 years ago, and long before the arrival of Christianity. The wells have served both a functional and ritualistic purpose. They were an important source of fresh drinking water for the local people and those travelling past, and a place for spiritual expression. Professor Pruntius MacAnna wrote in 1970 that The cult of wells is, of course, ancient and well attested among the insular Celts, and is reflected in the great number of holy wells frequented until recent times in Ireland. And then our local holy well. From 2005 to 2010, and then continuing in 2017 to 19, I visited and documented a number of holy wells. These are wells which are frequented by the public, used to help and heal people, and some of them are known for particular cures, such as Tubernalt, a picturesque holy well on the shores of Lough Gill, close to Sligo town. It is situated in a quiet wooded glade, and a little stream flows continuously from its enclosed spring. St. Patrick is reputed to have travelled to this well and to have left the imprint of his fingers in the mass rock there. People now put their fingers in these holes and pray to the saint for assistance with whatever ails them. Anyone with back pain can also look for a cure on the simple altar by pressing their back into a natural curve in the rock. People visit this well every day to pray, to light candles, and to drink the spring water. The mark of man and the Catholic Church is on this holy well, yet it retains its charm and sense of tranquility. The rag tree above the well is wild and impressive and harks back to pagan beliefs. It is a small holly tree, colourfully laden with a myriad of personal belongings: ribbons, hair bubbles, jewellery, shoelaces, socks, scarves, clothing labels, glasses, keys, strips of plastic, rosary beads, holy medals, monopoly money, children's teddies, and women's stockings. Ty Kilgallen, a Sligo man, a photographer and an antiquarian, had visited the holy well, as everyone calls it locally, in the 1920s. On that occasion, he was with a friend, a Mr. Scallon, who was an officer with the British Expeditionary Forces. When this man came upon the rag tree at Tubernalt, he informed Kilgallen that he saw the very same practices being performed by natives at a well a few miles from Khartoum, Sudan, tying strips torn from their undergarments to bushes there in order to effect a cure for some malady. Another Sligo man, Michael Quirk, understands that today the goddess is to be found in the landscape surrounding this well, in the mountains and the ancient cairns, and especially in the waters. Here her three aspects are present. The lake, Lough Gill, is Fionnavar, the bright girl. The holy well, Tubernalt, is Maeve, the powerful woman. And the nearby river, Garvogue, is Garvogue, the wise old woman, or the Cailleach, who offers immortality. Thank you.
Thanks, Cess. That's lovely. And your mentioning of the rag tree.
Yes.
It's quite an amazing image. We've seen them or we've heard of them. This idea of leaving something of your own behind. And am I right in thinking that you're leaving your ailment behind as well? You're kind of, so the tree takes on the badness or whatever it is that's affecting you.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we would call it the principle of transference. So my understanding is the tradition is they've always been like that for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. So people go to a well, and if you go to the Holy Well tomorrow in Sligo, just out the road, people leave a little bit of themselves. So these days, I listed off things, or it might be like a hair bobble or a ribbon. So it's like your problem, you could be trying to help yourself or somebody else, and your problem might be a physical problem, or it might be a psychological, or help with exams. People do that, especially in the pilgrimages. But so the idea, so you've got a physical problem and you want help with it. So you leave a little bit, you go to the Holy Well, drink the water, say your prayers. So they're basically a mixture of the Christian and the pre-Christian. And then they go to the rag tree, which would often be a holly tree or an ash tree. But it could be any kind of a tree, or a laurel tree. I've seen laurel trees. And again, you leave a little something, or you could even pull out a wisp of hair and tie it to the tree. But the idea is that as your little personal item blows there in the winds and disintegrates and breaks down, your problem will be taken away with it. Or when you leave the holy well, you leave your problem behind at the tree. You transfer it to the tree, and you don't do the tree any damage. The tree can take it. So, and in the past, you can imagine when people had natural fibres. So you might have had a nice scarf, a tweed scarf or something, and you could take like a piece of wool, and it would actually disintegrate. Now, the modern synthetic fabrics probably won't, they won't, but if you had natural fabrics, they would probably disappear within a few months. So people took that as a sign that the illness went with it. And I thought that was interesting. Kilgannon man, Sligo historian, he had, made that reference connecting the Irish tradition with the North African tradition, Sudan. That's more East Africa, isn't it? Northeast Africa. So it's probably somebody else might like to investigate that. There must be interesting cultural links, I think.
Yeah.
But it's that idea, leaving the problem behind, transferring it. And that would come up quite a lot in the folk medicine.
That's such an interesting insight, though, the idea that in the past you'd put your piece of wool or whatever and it would disintegrate and your problem would disintegrate with it. You leave it behind. But in today's society, you've got your synthetic, problem, that's the synthetic ribbon that holds your problem and it never goes away because it doesn't disintegrate. But I suppose what's really interesting about the holy wells that you were just talking about and the rag tree in itself is that there's no human mediator between you and the cure, or
Yes.
it's the actual land itself, or in the case of the holy well, the rocks around the well. So if you put your hands inside the holes in the rock, or you lay your back on that curved rock, and you're cured. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's quite ancient, but interesting distinction that there isn't a human that has to kind of
No,
be
there's
the
no, I
mediator.
suppose it's you and your maker,
Yeah.
or whatever you believe. Traditionally, Ireland has been a very strong Catholic country, so you went to the holy well to meet God. And I actually think it's very interesting. I think people love holy wells, and they can be, some of them are extraordinarily beautiful, very complex, very simple. I had loads of fun going around holy wells, and lots of tea and lots of chats. But I think people like being out in nature. We all like being in nature. So you go to a holy well, you could pop into the church and say a few prayers or ask for some help, but you could also go to a holy well and have a little adventure and be out and get some fresh air. And just being in nature is very healing for us, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a lot of respect. The holy wells are protected and hopefully will continue to be protected. So, very special places.
So Cecily, you have travelled the length and breadth of the island, searching out all of these cures. And I'm sure there's been some very odd ones you've come across. What was the oddest or funniest or weirdest one that you came across?
Well, all sorts of interesting one. And one I'm very fond of, I think it's really quite fascinating, is the cure for the heart. And I actually talked to someone who lives not too far away in County Sligo who has this cure. And it's very old and it's made with porridge. And we all like our porridge, or lots of us like porridge. I like porridge. So we have a porridge in the morning time. But this particular man makes the cure with porridge. So if you've got some kind of a heart problem, whatever it is, you have to visit the man 3 times. And otherwise you could be 6 visits or 9 visits again. But he said he'd never take you 4 times. It would have to be 3 or the 6th or whatever until the problem resolved. So people would go with their heart issue, and obviously heart issues can be very serious problems. And then he tells you to bring some pinhead oatmeal with you. And then it's quite a complex ritual, but basically he sits you down, gets a cup or a glass and puts the oatmeal into the glass, and he covers it with like a little white hanky. So it's filled to the brim, and then it's quite an elaborate ritual. He says prayers and he moves the upturned glass that's held in place with the handkerchief around your body, around your chest, forward and backwards. And then he lays hands on your head, and he will say prayers. And this all might take 10 minutes. Very old cures passed on to him by an old lady that he knew, probably going back hundreds of years. But the thing about the oatmeal was that, so when after he's completed his ritual, he lifts the handkerchief off, and he said that if there's movement in the oatmeal, like if there's a little vacuum and it's all been squashed to one side a little bit, that means that there's something wrong with your heart, right? If there's no movement, he thinks there's nothing wrong with your heart. So then but what you have to do then, if you have the problem, you have to take the porridge, you have to keep it very close to your body, like maybe in your pocket, really, so nobody would interfere with it or pass by it. A lot of ritual again. You bring it home and you cook the porridge and you have to eat it pretty quickly, maybe that evening or the next day. And that's part of the ritual. And then you bring back the porridge again a few days later and you repeat it again. And then what he says, when your heart is healed and the problem is resolved, the porridge won't move. So when he lifts off the handkerchief, there'll be no movement. And I think that's it's a great combination of lots of the elements of the folklore and the folk medicine tradition. And I think it's quite fascinating. And I've been told, people who have had quite serious heart issues have found help there. So.
Cecily, I am very disappointed that we're running out of time because I wanted to ask you about curses and how to put them on people and how to take them off people. But we're not going to have time because I want to open up to the audience for a question and answer session. So if you have any questions for Cecily, can you just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. And you can ask about the curses.
Thank you both. That was wonderful. I do want to ask about the curses. As you were talking, Cecily, I was thinking of there's a wonderful book by Carlo Gabler called The Cure.
Okay.
Which, of course, is about the terrible burning of Bridget Cleary in the late 19th century when they thought she was possessed by the fairies and fire is what was the cure and the poor woman died. I'm just wondering in your researches if you did come across, like it sounds very benevolent, did you come across any of that malevolent kind of element?
I didn't, to be honest, I didn't. Now, I think that probably existed in the past, and you can imagine rural Ireland, very small communities and everybody thrown in together and no way of escaping. So a lot of things were happening, unfortunately. But no, I didn't personally come across it, but I do write a little bit about Bridget Cleary because she's a very well-known example. Basically, in the past, so we're talking 1800s or probably much earlier even, but say certainly more contemporary, 1800s into the 1900s, people didn't understand the causes of illness. So a lot of illnesses were attributed to the fairies often, or some supernatural. You'd upset somebody or some ancestor, and the changeling, and we all know about from our W.B. Yeats poetry, the stolen child. So that's quite romanticized. But what they believed was that, a woman was taken to be a wet nurse for the fairy babies, and they would steal a good healthy child, and they'd leave a kind of a sickly fairy child. And then unfortunately Bridget Cleary was murdered by her family as part of that process to get rid of the supposed fairy. So no, I didn't come across. I have to say, I think contemporary folk medicine is much more relaxed, probably, and probably things like that were quite difficult. People have just kind of let go by the wayside. But for example, Niamh was talking about curses. So of course we should never curse anybody, but there are a few cursing stones around. So I did investigate. Obviously there's cursing stones people will know on Inishmurray Island, which isn't too far away. And then there were cursing stones I investigated down near Black Lion. They could be healing stones, but I think they were more traditionally used for cursing. But a lot of, I came across these Balawn stones, which are very old as well, and they would be stones that have the cures associated with them. Maybe if there's water in them, they're used for curing warts. So sorry, I'm not sure if I've answered your question as such, but I think a lot of that, it's there, it exists, and it's a great wealth of information. But it was a way, my understanding of it, it was a way of trying to understand and explain. And Bridget Cleary, that lady that died, she probably had postnatal depression or something. Oh, and then she didn't have children. That was the thing. She was married for many years and she had no children. And in rural Ireland, that was a very shameful thing. So,
Any other question?
Hi, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I was just wondering, I know you've mentioned that people tend to follow the cures that have been given, the holders of the cures, like verbatim pretty much. But I was wondering, have you seen any potential for cures to evolve over time?
Yeah, I would as well. Also, people would have cures, but they would little tweaks or little adaptations of them. So, you're a young man, you might be given a cure by your grandmother, for example. So then you would maybe adapt it or change it a little bit. And people are starting to use modern technology now, because that's one of the good things about the cures. Nothing, as we know, will survive unless it changes and adapts and moves. So the cures aren't set in stone. So, for example, if you need a cure, you text a friend and you say, I have a cure for, I don't know, toothache. And then they text you back a name of a person, of someone with toothache. So, yeah. And then people will say, for example, one man, he was making a cure. It was the cure of the sprain. Oh, yeah, it was a sprain cure. And he used a thread, which many people do. But he said, I was told by whoever gave it to me, I was told I can only make it before the sun sets, right? But he said, there's somewhere in the world where the sun hasn't set. So I go by that, and I'll make it whatever time people ask me to make it. And then another woman, an old woman I interviewed down in Leitrim, and she had a cure for a thing called erysipelas, St. Anthony's fire, which was more of a condition in the past. I think it's a bacteria, but basically people would get really red skin on their face. Probably get a little bit today, but less so. So it was a condition, a bacterial infection. People would get it really bad. So she had a herbal cure for that. But again, she told me that the old man, often the cures they change sex each time. So a woman gives it to a man and he'll pass it to a woman. But she told me that an old man up the hills, and he gave me the cure and told me how to make it. And he said, you get a rock and you put the herb on the rock and you give it a good bash with another rock and you break it down like that, right? Sort of pestle and mortar idea, Irish pestle and mortar. But she was laughing and she said, no, I've got a food processor. So I just go, so yeah, people make changes and they tweak them and they adapt them depending on what. And that's helpful, but they wouldn't radically change it, or they would see maybe a justification for changing it. And I think that's one of the strengths of the cures.
Because I was just thinking some of them are obviously like pre-Christianity, and there's prayer mixed in with them as well.
Yes.
So there's a potential there for it to evolve even.
Exactly. Yeah. So, for example, I met one man, he's a cure prayer, he'd be from South Donegal, for bleeding. And you just phone him, it could be, he said it could be a gunshot, it could be someone cut with a knife, it could be a woman hemorrhaging, giving birth or something, whatever the issue is. So you phone them and then he just says the prayer. And he said, I'm not a religious person, I never pray, but my mum gave me the cure, and it's a proper prayer. Often they're secret prayers, or there might be a combination of prayers that we'd all know, but these would be more special prayers. So his mum had given him the prayer and he says it, but he says, I don't pray any other time, but I pray for that. So, and I stick to that tradition. So it's passed on. But things could evolve, or people might evolve how they do them. And I think if you're doing it from a good place and a good heart, and you want you want the healing to take place, the cure to take place, I think it'll, that's where it will be successful, or as successful as possible.
Thank you.
Question down here.
That's okay. So basically, a lot of cures are within families, and people will have them within families, and they'll pass them from one generation to the next. Now, not all, but people, it's no more than having a bit of property or a bit of land. They like to pass it on. They think this is part of our tradition, our family, so they'll pass it from one generation to the next. Often the sex will change, so a grandmother will give it to her son, and then he'll pass it on to his granddaughter. But then some people get cures from strangers. People they don't know, or people that just maybe take a shine to them for whatever reason, a neighbour or a friend. So, for example, I'd interviewed a woman away out in the hills of Leitrim, over towards Cavan way, and she had a cure for orf in sheep, which is this quite nasty. The sheep get blisters on their mouth, and the lambs get it, and it's quite infectious, and basically they can't suckle and they will die quite quickly, and it can spread through a herd of sheep very quickly. So she makes that cure. It's a faith cure. She does a ritual out in the fields and says prayers, and she wouldn't quite tell me how she does it. So that was fine. That was her secret. But she said there was an old man who lived, in the valley, in the same valley as her, and he wrote to her, I think, when he was quite elderly, and he passed her the cure. But he said he knew I was a good woman for the sheep, and I liked the sheep. So that's why he passed. So it's important to pass it to someone. You don't want to pass the cure to someone that's disinterested in it. For example, another woman I talked to, not too far away from her, she had a headache cure that she'd got from her father, and she made it for many years. And she would like to give it to her daughter, and her daughter was interested in getting it. But to satisfy the stipulation, they were going to pass it to her daughter's husband for a while. And then he might make it for a while, maybe 6 months, and then he'd pass it to the daughter. So it had technically done what it was supposed to do. So there's those rituals involved. And then some cures can't be passed on. Some cures die with people, like the seven sons, they can't maybe pass it on. If you're born a posthumous child, that means your dad has died before you're born. Those people have a cure for thrush, for foul mouth it's called. Babies that are born breech in Ireland were traditionally believed to have a cure for back pain. But nowadays in hospital, very few breech births, the babies are turned in the uterus, or they're born C-section. So the less breech births. So different ways people might get a cure, or they're passed on.
We've room for one more short question.
Hello, Cecily. I was just wondering, since you are published, since you have been published, have many people been contacting you to try and find these people? And would you see any value in there being a directory or some kind of a database so that
Well, yeah, people do contact me individually, and I'll always, if anybody wants me, I'll help them if they come up and ask me a question, or if I can. So I do. But, to be honest, what I found in my research, people very much, they're just ordinary people like you or I, and they don't really want troops of people coming to their houses. So, and it, as Niamh said in the beginning, it's very much community-based. Say, do you need a cure? And it's the oral tradition, the word of mouth is really a strong part. So I can see people might say, it'd be great to have a big list of people, but I'm respectful of people's wishes and people in general. Some people might be happy with that, but I'd say the majority of people don't want that. They don't want publicity. And some people even said to me, that's part of the cure, is for you to find me. So you have to, so supposing you need a cure for, I don't know, some issue, a sore knee or something like that, and you're trying to find someone who can help you. So you have to find, make inquiries and process, and maybe then drive to somewhere and track down the person. I spent a lot of time myself driving around country roads and whatnot, trying to find people. So that's part of the process. So, and I suppose I also thought too, we're all transient, obviously, in this world. So, the people that currently have them will pass on, and they'll pass their cures or not pass their cures. And then, so I see them part as a bigger picture. That's what I've said in my book. They're just kind of I call them the guardians of the cure currently. But no, so to answer your question, most people wouldn't like a lot of publicity. But having said that, there will be people, I know in the past there's been certain shopkeepers around, or people who will have a little book themselves, and they might have 50 names in it of people in the area. So if you make inquiries, you can find out. And I don't really look on social media, but there's probably something out there where some people put out information. But I kind of stick to the more traditional approach, the oral, word of mouth, and people having their privacy. Because the cures have to be part, they have to be a manageable part of your life. And it's interesting, the whole post-COVID things, if things will change. Because I did my interviewing before COVID. So people have become maybe a little bit hesitant about people coming to their houses, a little more wary. Things I think probably have changed, the dynamics of rural Ireland and Ireland. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out.
So thanks. I know there's other questions, but we have to move on, and we're going to have another wonderful piece of music from Aoife Hammond. And after Aoife's second piece of music here, we're going to have the open mic led by Catherine Whitehead, ATU student, and I'm looking forward to both.
Ma choras ma chúplas ma gunne ma love. Hid kyo an tal agus chal me ma chorsa. Is hui me sem hu idir knuk agus glaun. Kei hi go haramach mali cúnálin. Bedeshes fabratas vi a fold mar an or. Gur lawer si ga manga chum. Is hug si queer a gefaltu. Is hug si dum fornation me is don kyo. Vi bauer dar a hali vi quilla chort vi an. Tvi anker mor fion an a linach ni gart. Dar a vrimach ar a wat der ner cha me milo. Sé an rodúd na misa vi gimocht an chlár. Chorig si lapel a vrat a gisiada. Is dort silum shena is colagus of. Nor a form is a macho. Gur of shudi van si vi fion vara wan. Dairi do hi the galigo is glucid neas as tourist the hall. Ta fion var again who like taglan a chluti near wallum havula fui richt an machas. Ke chasi a dach me ti fadri omach vi kjarke galor an gan quillach gan all. Hussi me fjuka har himpel an stolan. Is hanig on loan on is dorche ara. Jan an kirador hakador manador mar. Nak van a viol agus dana gwif green. Vi long fwyn a chulan on. Vi board fwyn a sholta on. Vi yn brucus on bron on. Is cacharn am ya. Ma hain tu har hali te wali na chorsa. Vi asses fig shul gan hairi on law. Go koshlan I vari ma hain tu an sholshin. Be tu was looked a willuk nok mia.
Good evening, and thank you to the library for giving the opportunity for people to speak at the open mic. And we'll start with Patrick Pugh. Thank you, Patrick.
I like the bit about the holy wells, very interesting. Right. I'm a water diviner, so it's kind of like... Special person. Yeah. Okay, folks, this is a humorous but serious poem. It's a combination of both aspects. Very topical for the moment in society. The title of the poem is called The Red Button. Flash and fry, the barbecue for all. Panic buying with a benzo smile. Purchasing that velvet soft for that doomsday wipe. Surviving doomsday with a pack of loo roll is a must in any prepper's handbook. And a bottle of benzodiazepines for that Zen Buddha caterpillar moment, sitting on a fly agaric. Just don't mind the apocalypse red carpet. It's only for celebrities, neocons with nice shoes and bad haircuts, sporting immortality bullet holes, and Billy Graham evangelist-style politics, with free New English versions of God and blessings for the poor, but don't mind the apocalypse. It holds pestilence and disease for all. It's the ultimate raffle ticket, where everybody's a winner. No more global warming, greenwashed politics, just nuclear winter and purple rain. To wash away your worries and remaining skin, Lidl and Tesco's might be temporarily closed due to the inconvenience of adverse weather and live staff. But the new Elon Musk robot at the till will serve you, provided you have a working iPhone. But don't mind the apocalypse. Vote now for the next crazy with his finger on the button. Who really cares for you and your children? For he has the holy ear bringing him closer to God's words of repentance. As long as he's not a Russian-speaking God, all will be fine on the great day of reckoning, when we have that Forrest Gump smile and our head between our knees, kissing our arses goodbye.
Thank you very much, Patrick. If I could next call Anne Feehan. Anne, are you reading it? Is Anne Feehan here too? Would you like to read, Anne? No, okay, that's perfectly fine. We'll call Sheridan Langley. Thank you, Sheridan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sheridan Langley, and I have a poem about Sligo. I hope I remember it all. I think it's appropriate, seeing as we're in Sligo Library. Turn the corner for Sligo, a woman's county for sure. Turn the corner for Sligo, it really has an allure. There isn't a county like it in the whole of the Emerald Isle, as you'll see when I tell you the story about Sligo and all of her style. Not many a city or town lies under a woman's crown, but Sligo can say that for sure. Queen Maeve will begin with the tour. It's magic, you see, when you think of the woman she is and the link to the women she's seen come and go, like Markovich Eva, although there's Lily and Lolly there too, Maud Gonne, Lady Gregory, few. What a mix of great women we see, to inspire, to empower, and to be. So Sligo begins with all this. It's not somewhere you'd want to miss. In the distance there is great Ben Bulben, like a lion stretched out, it's no wonder. He sees near and far the lovely Glencar with its waterfall lake and Truskmore. Knocknarea lies across from his view. The king and the queen bow to you. Strandhill, Ross's Point and Drumcliff, Lissadell, Hazelwood and Glenif. Mullockmore, Classybone by the sea, a fairy tale view, you'll agree. The folklore, the magic, the mist, the king and the queen can't resist. It's the ferns, it's the dew, it's the fairies, all under the woods and the sea. Why Yeats and his brother both loves it, creating their art that we see. Garavogue is the name of the river. It runs through the town to deliver the swans on its back. The pubs have the crack, like Hargadin's, Connolly's, Crows. Traditional music abounds as it wafts from the pubs in the town. When Coleman displayed the fiddle he played, the king and the queen danced around. The Armada at Strigian Grange went adrift in the sea, it's not strange, as the royals looked on and the people are gone, with the wakes and the tombs, the pain and the wounds, Carramore, Carrakiel, Grawmacree.
Thank you very much, Sheridan. And next I'll ask Bridget McMorrow to read for us. Thank you, Bridget.
I got grabbed on the way in, Aisling, so hi, I'm Bridget. This is an extract from a piece. I've read extracts of this before at the Word and at other events. So if I've read this specific extract, you didn't hear it. Growing up, my mother's bedroom was the first door at the top of the landing. Her bedroom window faced out onto the street. Her bed was so big you had to climb onto it to get to the cramped bookshelves on the other side. She was a hoarder. Birthday cards, photos, books, knickknacks, baby items from her 3 kids, my communion dress, everything she could get her hands on or fit in a shoebox underneath the crowded space, beneath her bed, or shove into the rickety wooden wardrobe or in heaps on the floor. The thin curtains were often drawn, the room usually half black, the weaves of black broken by circles of orange from the streetlights outside, sheets of blue, white, red, yellow, green, sliced through the room on the box TV. The lamp on the side of her bed spilled swirls of orange from a dying bulb. I would lie in her bed pretending to sleep, listening to her breathing. The faded spine of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code was level with my face. Our house was always in some level of filth. My oldest brother, Tiernan, had to learn to cook from a young age to feed us. She never acted like a mother unless Tusla was coming. You knew a social worker was arriving when we'd come home from school, and instead of being in bed, she was mopping floors. From an early age, she taught us to lie, coaching us on what to say so we wouldn't get taken off her. That's exactly what happened. She lost custody of all 3 of her kids. It was just before the Christmas of 2010, and we, my brothers Tiernan and Justin, found ourselves trudging through snow as high as my knees, the footpaths a game of Russian roulette from the ice. I was cold, my fingers aching and red, but I kept my mouth shut. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. And I'll finish on a little poem that I'm still working on. It's called Pollarding and Coppicing. The wood has been chipped, sits now in large mounds like graves around the garden. Rough mounds, some sand-coloured, some the colour of rich honey, some nearer to white. They were tall and alive less than a week ago, now cut to 1,000,000 pieces that would scatter to the wind. Strange how it should happen in the same week she is cremated. Sad, but now we have so much sky. Thank you and good night.
So thanks, everyone. We've come to the end of our evening. I just wanted to say a great big thank you to Cecily and Niamh for this evening. It was just an absolutely fascinating conversation with Cecily. And it's probably our first evening where we didn't even get a chance to talk about the craft or the writing craft or what you're working on next, because normally that comes up in the conversation. But the topic of your book has been just so interesting. I think we've just been totally in awe of it. Are you working on something new, by the way?
Thinking.
Yes, great. So the next time we can talk about that. And thanks, Niamh, for asking such insightful questions. So I'm just going to hand you over to Aoife, agus Garamagad, agus Slán. Aoife, thank you.
Babog na bhealtain na maidin an thair, Suas gach nach is sias gach glair. Calini masha caban galag leika, Agam féin an saoir a lin. Willin is skull is strong is square, and Agam féin an saoir a lin. Wind showed leg al hail on na, Agam féin an saoir a lin. Saoire banyan again, Agam féin an saoir a lin. Saoire buin an noni gleidal, Agam féin an saoir a lin. Saoire banyan again, Agam féin an saoir a lin. Saoire buin an noni gleidal, Agam féin an saoir a lin. Thank you.